Apologize for that little pause there. I had to sneeze, and I wanted to not do it in front of you. Today's random baseball item of the day. I was thumbing through some old cards today. Stumbled across this beauty from 2006 Topps Update. Mike Piazza hits home run number 400, and it's Mike in his Padres uniform. We forget sometimes that Mike did play for a couple other teams besides just the Dodgers and the Mets. He was briefly on the Marlins, but he also played for the Padres and the Oakland Athletics as well. And here he is on this card, looking nice and buff. He almost looks like a guy who took steroids. I'm not saying he did. I'm not about to say what anybody did, but he kind of looks like he's really beefed up there. Anyway, April 26, 2006, he hit career home run number 400. And this card captured it. Pretty cool when you think about it. Today's trivia question. Television, people forget television has been around for a long time. I was doing a little research when I thought about this question, I was doing a little research. The science behind transmitting an image over wires, believe it or not, has been investigated, studied, and attempted since the mid-1800s. Not just, they were doing telegraph lines for a long time, but the concept of transmitting an image had been investigated for a long time in the mid-1800s as well. And eventually in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were successfully transmitting images. But these are still images. They could not yet transmit moving images, which would be television. So, but the technology, if you know anything about your television, the technology to do it actually came about in the 20s. The concept that you could send these images. Now, it really wasn't a commercial thing because, well, who are you going to transmit it to? Nobody had televisions. People didn't buy them. They didn't own them. No one knew what the heck it was. So, who are you going to transmit these images to? That was a problem. Well, eventually, in the mid-1930s, the technology had developed. Enough rich people with more money than they knew what to do with would get these really expensive televisions. And there were a couple in service such that in the late 1930s, I'm not going to tell you what year, we'll use this as another trivia question somewhere down the line. In the late 1930s, Major League Baseball did televise its first ever live baseball game, but it was very limited in distribution because, first of all, the technology to send the signal across the world didn't exist yet. The technology was still dependent upon wires in the ground, so only a local area could actually receive these signals. So it was limited in scope and limited in audience, so not many people saw it. However, eventually technology did develop to what we have today. And eventually, as with today, baseball is a regular occurrence on television. However, my question to you is, which World Series was the first one to be broadcast on television to audiences that had television? So that was the question. Which World Series in what year was the first to be broadcast on television? Answer me that question, please. What you're playing for from my Cooperstown, my 2013 Panini Cooperstown the other day. The blue sparkle version of Honus Wagner's card, number to 499. That's what you're playing for. If you can answer me that answer, if you can send me that answer via email, I will include my email in the description below, along with a repeat of that question. You will have today and tomorrow to answer. We will pick a winner on Sunday. Good luck to everybody on that one. Today, I was thinking about what to show off, and it occurred to me some of the things I like are old sets that nobody really cares about much anymore. I still enjoy looking at them once in a while. Then there are those sets that nobody wants to look at. Even them, even me, who doesn't ever want to look at them because they're so bland and boring, I will still take them out and look at them because that's my job. I'm a collector. I want to look at these sets. A perfect example is one of the most boring and bland sets ever created, and a set that today, the full set of 660 cards will cost you about $5, probably $1. There's probably dealers with cases of this lying around who are happy to take $1 to get it off their table. That is the 1990 Fleer factory set. There it is. It is one of the most bland and boring sets ever created. It was so overly produced. I promise you, there are dealers dying to get rid of this for like $5, if not less. So there you have it. I'm going to show you some of the base cards and some of the things I do like. Because one of the things I did like about Fleer is in the back, they had these little subsets that where they would take a picture of two people, two or three, or a group of people, players standing together, and then try and tie them together in some manner. So first I'm going to show you off the basic cards that were included in the set, then show off some of the subsets that I love so much. So the base card, if you know your Fleer, what they did was they produced the cards numerically. They would order it by teams. And the first team in the set that year typically was the World Series winner of the previous year. So the 1990 cards start off with the Oakland Athletics. Okay, so here is a card of Jose Canseco, probably at that time still one of the best and most beloved superstars of the game at this time. Did have a particularly great 1989, but he still was an immensely popular and a huge force in the hobby at this time. And he was part of the first set. And then in each team, the players were numbered alphabetically. So anybody with an A would be the first card in a set, and so forth and so on. And they did that with all the teams. And then at the back of the set, they had their little inserts. So in this particular case, I'll show the inserts in a second, but they also had your standard checklist. They did not have team checklists that Tops Like Tops did. You had your basic checklist, and you can see it was arranged by teams on the front and back. Okay. They also, in this particular case, had a subset of rookies. I'm not going to go through the rookies because there are not even any Hall of Fame rookies in there. But here's one of Moises Alou, very famous player from the 1990s, and forgotten Philly Chuck McElroy. A little bit of bio on those. People forget Moises Alou was a Pirate when he first came up. Interesting little card. There's a little subset in the back of that. And what came in every pack, as we all know, are stickers. So here's the Philly team sticker, and then they would also include these 4 little logo stickers. And then they have trivia. Let's look at the trivia real quick. True or false? The Phillies played the first night game in baseball history. That is true. In what year did the Phillies win their only World Series championship? Now, this was 1990, so 2008 hadn't happened yet, but 1980 was the answer to that question. What were the Phillies known in the early 1950s? They were the Whiz Kids back then. And what was the Phillies' home park in 1970? That is the year before the vet opened, so it would have been Connie Mack Stadium. What was the other trivia? Is it the same one? Oh, true or false? The Expos were the first Canadian team in the major leagues. That is true. What stadium did 92,706 fans attend the 5th game of the 1959 World Series? The answer is the Los Angeles Coliseum. Dodger Stadium had not yet been built yet, so they were playing in a stadium that was really built for football that could fit 100,000 fans. True or false? The Phillies played in the first. We already had that one. And true or false? The Mets won a World Series in their 8th year of existence. Kind of an odd thing to say, their 8th year, but it is true. Anyway, those were the stickers, and I happen to have in my collection the entire run of 1988, 1990 stickers and all variations thereof. Not that that's that impressive, but I do. Um, and then, like I said, let's look at the your standard cards. So I want to show you every team card, meaning an example of every team offering, because I went through all the teams and pulled one player from each team who was about the best player of the team that year. So again, for example, Canseco was the most legendary A at the time. I found that Lou Whitaker probably had the best season in '89. Here he is. Should be a Hall of Famer. Hopefully he will be soon. Tom Glavine in his second year pretty much had the best record on the Braves. Murph was winding down. The other guys hadn't really stepped up to the plate yet. Darren Dalton was about the best thing the Phillies had going on. They really didn't have any superstars in the early '90s, late '80s. Alvin Davis. The Mariners had a lot of great future Hall of Famers on their team at this point in time. They had Edgar Martinez, Ken Griffey Jr., Randy Johnson. They had Omar Vizquel, who isn't a Hall of Famer, but they had a lot of awesome players. But believe it or not, people forget about Alvin Davis, who at that time was actually probably the best Mariner. Now, Greg Swindell, the Indians, they were the inspiration for the team, Major League, the movie. Rightly so. They were a pitiful, pitiful team. And the best thing I could find was Greg Swindell, who had a 13-6 pitching record that year. So he was about the best thing the Indians had to offer. Doug Drabeck was a perennial Cy Young candidate back in the late '80s, early '90s. Dave Winfield was about the best the Yankees were putting out there that day. Believe it or not, Winfield had a better year than Don Mattingly in 1989. He had a higher batting average and more home runs than Donnie Baseball. 1990 would be the year of the Reds, and Eric Davis was a big part of that. Take a moment real quick to look at this card itself. Why do I think this is such a bland card? You got your basic white border. You got this ribbon running around the whole thing, just a bit of a swirl right there. Position, or name and position, team up there. And your basic stats on the back, everything Fleer did. It's just so boring. And again, it was so overproduced. It is amazingly overproduced. And that's the way every team was. Every card, they tried to color match the team, logo up there. It was just, to me, it was just, it's an ugly card. Very, very boring. But again, the collector that I am, I still love to go back and look at this stuff and relish over how great these cards are just to have in your collection. Oral Hershiser, probably the best the Dodgers had at that time. Gibby's MVP season was 2 years past. Puckett was about the best the Twins had, about to come into another World Series ring in a couple more years. Danny Martinez, just shy of his perfect game, was about the best the Expos had. They had lost Andre Dawson already. Ruben Sierra, people forget how good Ruben Sierra was once in a while. He batted .306 that year in '89 and had 29 home runs. Paul Molitor was still with the Brewers, but Robin Yount had a better season. Wade Boggs was all that the Red Sox had. Clemens had a down year that year. Joe McGrain, the Cardinals had nobody. They had Ozzie Smith, but Ozzie Smith was, great defense, but very little offense. Ozzie Smith was not awesome. But Greg Swindell went 18-9, or Joe McGrain went 18-9 that year. He was kicking. He had a great year. Glenn Davis, people forget how great Glenn Davis was. The legendary Bagwell trade was about to happen. Astros getting Glenn Davis, or Astros giving up Glenn Davis to the Red Sox. The Red Sox giving up Jeff Bagwell to the Astros. So became the legend of Jeff Bagwell. Howard Johnson, a perennial 30-30 kind of a guy. You can see here 36 home runs, 41 stolen bases in '89. He had a 30-30 year in '87 as well. Strawberry had a down year. The Mets were winding down their greatness. Cal Ripken Jr. still kicking it. Mark Davis came off a Cy Young year in '89 because he had 44 saves that year with a 185 ERA. Great year for Mark Davis. You could say Tony Gwynn was better, but I think Mark Davis was the bigger name, believe it or not, that year. Bert Blyleven on the Angels. Nobody else on the Angels had the quality year he had because he went 17-5. Still doing it at his time. George Brett still plugging away for the Royals. I think Dave Stieb was about the best the Blue Jays had. There were a couple other choices I could have gone with, but I think Dave Stieb deserved to be the one I singled out. And Kevin Mitchell had just come off his MVP season in 1989, so I gave him the nod on the Giants. And lastly, Greg Maddux for the Cubs, just being Greg Maddux, 19-12. So that is what your base cards look like. And then again, they have a subset called Players of the Decade, which is essentially a few cards of some of the greats of the game as Fleer determined it. So you got George Brett, Fernando, Murph, who was really slowing down by then, Cal Ripken Jr., Ryan Sandberg, Donnie Baseball, Roger Clemens, George Bell, Jose Canseco, and Will Clark. I didn't pick Will Clark. I could have picked Will Clark over Kevin Mitchell as one of the greater players for the Giants, but again, Kevin Mitchell just had his MVP year, so I went with that. And then here come the cards I was talking about. These, and Fleer had them most of the years back in the junk wax era. This collection of small subset cards, part of the base set, that just threw pictures up of great pairings of players. So, start with this one, Game Savers, Mark Davis and Mitch Williams. Mark Davis, again, came off the Cy Young Award. I'll pause this so you can see it. And Mitch Williams, the Wild Thing, already known as the Wild Thing in 1990 because he was so incredibly wild. And I think it was more than anything because he earned 36 saves and 4 wins, but it was the way he pitched. He just looked so wild. And obviously Davis got the Cy Young that year. So a great little pairing of game stars. Interesting one here, Boston Igniters. Boggs, of course, is Boggs, and people forget Mike Greenwell was all that in the late 80s. By this time, I think he'd already been washed up and was nothing again. But back then he was still a big star. This one's interesting. Starter and stopper for the Royals and the Rangers. Mark Gubigza and Jeff Russell. And interesting, it says, I love this statement here. Neither Mark Gubigza or Jeff Russell carries the name recognition of the more celebrated hurlers in baseball. And it says, but now that each has been selected to represent the All-Star, the American League in the last 2 All-Star games, that should change. Well, guess what? It didn't. These guys are long forgotten members of the baseball community. They just are. Certainly of the hobby community, let's put it that way. Tony Fernandez and Cal Ripken Jr., league's best shortstops. People forget how good Tony Fernandez was. He's one of those players, spent some years in Japan. I don't think gets enough, hobby love. I mean, not that he was a Hall of Famer, but he was a quality player, Tony Fernandez. And Fleer's acknowledging it here. Love this one. Human Dynamos, Kirby Puckett and Bo Jackson. Bo Jackson, without question, was a dynamo. And Kirby just had that infectious smile and an infectious laugh that made him a domino in that way. And then here you have 300 Strikeout Club, Nolan Ryan and Mike Scott. Now, Nolan Ryan is legendary. I mean, he had a full 25-year career that was like phenomenal at all stops and all levels. He had a couple off years and down years, but for the most part, Nolan Ryan was dominant. Mike Scott had a brief window of dominance, and there's one year where he did make this 300 Strikeout Club. There you go. Another dynamic duo, Clark and Mitchell, obviously coming off the '89 World Series, National League pennant. They were 2 big stars of that thing here. AL All-Stars, McGuire and Mattingly, 2 of the bigger names in the game at that time. Certainly, big in the hobby as well. And then lastly, NL East rivals, the Mets and the Cubs. You have Howard Johnson and Ryan Sandberg. I was surprised how Johnson was so good for so long, Howard Johnson. Then I think it was injuries that derailed him because he just seemed to be plugging away 30-30 constantly. Just you thought he's going to end up in the Hall of Fame someday, but never made it, and certainly Rhino did. But these right here, these awesome little cards, people forget that the Fleer had these sets, these little groupings in them. And sometimes they got to be really awesome. Sometimes both players, you don't get that here where both players are Hall of Famers. But a lot of the times, if you look back at these sets, both of the people on these cards are Hall of Famers. And it's just really cool that Fleer did that and made a special little set like that. So anyway, like I said, I know I talked for a while on this one, but as a set collector, as a person who loves to admire the cards in my collection, not just have them, stick it in a corner somewhere and never looking at them, but actually going through the sets, looking at all the cards once in a while. Um, I love to do that, and it just, I love to share it with you. I hope you guys appreciate these sets that aren't valuable. They're you may consider them ugly. I consider this a very bland and boring set. It really is. But still, it's part of the hobby. It's fun to just look back at these cards every once in a while and remember. And I enjoy doing it. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please consider like, subscribing, commenting, and all that jazz. I really do appreciate your support as I try my best to support everybody else in this great card meeting. All right? Come back again on Friday. We got one more video before the end of the week. All right? Appreciate y'all tuning in. Thanks for watching, and take care.